Last year, Infernoids were one of the big-time trendy decks that many, including a number of prominent YouTube commentators, thought could challenge the meta. This sentiment especially built momentum after their YCS win in Dallas. Now Infernoids seem to have heavily fallen off, more than likely in large part due to Reasoning being hit from 3 to 1 on the most recent ban list. However, are Infernoids really so dependent on Reasoning that they are not competitive in the current meta? It is a valid question. So, what does my Infernoid deck look like? One of the two boss monsters among the ranks, Onuncu in this meta is a little less useful than its counterpart, Devyaty. However, despite this second place status, destroying all monsters when summoned and possessing the ability to negate a spell or trap card and banish it once per turn by tributing a monster is certainly nothing to sneeze at. The one big advantage Onuncu has over Devyaty is the extra 100 attack points, putting him at 3,000, allowing him to crash into a number of other 3,000 attack beaters and take advantage of his special summon from the graveyard ability, so you can put him back on the field if resources allow. I like running only one copy though, due to this special summoning ability from the graveyard and the steep cost of summoning it in general. Devyaty's ability to negate a monster effect is what gives it the edge over Onuncu in this meta in my opinion. In addition, the ability to wipe the field of spells and traps outside of Void card clears the road for attacks that can put your opponent up against it rather quickly. Similar to Onuncu though, the summoning cost of banishing 3 Infernoids is rather steep to run this card at multiples, and the graveyard summoning helps increase single card efficiency. I only run one. In addition, both boss monsters do struggle from the context that they're both over level 8, so you have to put them on the field last, because if you put them on the first, you can't summon any Infernoids unless you're playing Void Imagination. Attondel might be the most important Infernoid from the standpoint of increasing win percentage due to its double attacking 2800 attack nature. One of the key features of Attondel's double attack is that the second attack can be a direct one instead of against another monster, which allows the player to run up the damage. In addition, the level 8 standing can lead to a rank 8 summons, followed up by an effect sending the Attondel to the graveyard, then resummoning that Attondel from the graveyard to really pile up the damage and advantage if the rank 8 is the only monster on your field. I run 2 copies though because 3 copies can tend to get a little bit cloggy. The importance of Seitsemas has significantly increased over the change in meta from last year to this year, as targetless banishing dodges a lot of innate defensive capacities of a number of key monsters in various meta decks. At 2600 attack, Seitsemas also has enough power to make its banish effect worthwhile, in addition to possessing the flexibility to summon it from the graveyard. Finally, its level 7 standing is actually rather helpful, not really for rank 7 plays, because rarely will Seitsemas be inferior to what you can bring out via that rank 7 play, but instead because it can be discarded from the deck to the graveyard by Decatron to set up a rank 8 play between Decatron and Attondel, and then you can bring the Seitsemas back onto the field and have that rank 8 and the Seitsemas do some significant damage to your opponent's field. Due to its ability to typically remove the most dangerous threat on the opponent's board, I run 3 copies. Siege is the worst Infernoid of the group, as its effect is rather substandard and almost pathetic in a sense, especially because the opponent gets to select the extra deck monster to banish. The effect would certainly have its moments if the Infernoid player got to select the monster, but that is not the case. Piaty gets ignored a little more than I think it should, because while tossing things into the graveyard from the hand is not as foolproof disadvantage for the opponent as it used to be, it still has its moments. Also, when worse comes to worse, it can be used as part of the cost to summon another Infernoid. I run 1 copy. Patrulea is definitely a high-quality monster. At the cheap cost of a single banishment, you get a monster that can effectively nuke 1 threat on the opponent's back row, increasing the probability that a Mirror Force variant or a Solemn family member will not interfere in your future plays. Patrulea can also be a great dump target for Decatron due to the usefulness of its effect. I run 3 copies for its good effect, and because one needs to run a lot of Infernoids for a quality build. Harmadik has lost a significant amount of its usefulness as the meta has changed to a more non-targeting, non-destructive floating one. However, it is nice as a level 3 to make Decatron a level 4, opening up various Synchro plays as well as rank 4 plays. Overall, because Harmadik is still an Infernoid and can be useful at times, running 3 really is not a liability in any real way, so that's what I do. In the past, Antra was a slight step down from Harmadik in most cases, but with so many meta decks wanting their monsters destroyed and or sent to the graveyard rather than bounced back into their hand, sans Monarchs, Antra definitely has a number of situations where its return effect is superior to Harmadik's destruction effect. The problem is, Harmadik being a level 3 gives it much more versatility in this deck over Antra's level 2 standing, thus Harmadik gets the nod, and I only run 2 copies of Antra. The newest Infernoid monster is one of the most important. Decatron is fantastic on 3 levels. First, it is the only Infernoid monster that can be normal summoned, so it can evade the influence of incredibly annoying cards like Vanity's Emptiness and Imperial Iron Wall. 2. Not only can it evade these annoying Infernoid stopping cards, its level and copy effect attribute allows the Infernoid player to remove these threats, as well as make other plays either on the field or from the extra deck via a wide variety of Synchro and XZ plays. 3. The fact that the copy target is sent to the graveyard is a nice bonus, setting up meaningful combo plays due to the graveyard summoning of higher level Infernoids. Run 3 copies no matter what. In my opinion, Pimaris is a side deck specialist for those decks that need to set monsters or lots of back row to start their combo strings. Tira is one of those cards that does not seem to be worth the effort, especially in this meta where extra deck special summoned monsters by the opponent are still prevalent but not as common as they once were, for without summoning it via Void Imagination send from deck effect, it is certainly not worth it. Overall, Tira is a rather bad card because it seems to focus on OTK behavior, but you have to drop the Void Imagination from the field to summon it at any real potential, thereby limiting the OTK potential despite possible combinations involving non-effect ritual monsters and Herald of the Arc-Light. Granted, since I don't run Void Imagination though, running Tira is basically a non-starter for me from the get-go. Void Seer is one of those annoying cards because while it should be more useful, in my experience it tends to be more of a draw liability than a boon. The problem I find with Void Seer is that in the past meta, when attack power was not as important, both of its effects were quality. Now, outside of either Onuncu or Devyaty, Infernoids are more prone to getting run over by other decks, be it Cosmos, Monarchs, or Blue Eyes, making Seer's on-field effect more of a wasted draw than a useful advantage. I side 2 copies of Void Seer, but I don't main any copies. Void Imagination is a somewhat frustrating card because its dual effects are somewhat opposed against each other. The usefulness of the level reduction effect is inversely proportional to duel progression. Basically, it gets better the longer the duel, allowing the player to take full advantage of higher level Infernoid grave summoning abilities. However, to take advantage of those abilities, one must first get those cards into the graveyard, but Imagination's ability to do that leads to its removal from the field, thereby mitigating its ability to act as a swarming catalyst by reducing levels. That graveyard dump, in contrast, wants Infernoids in the deck, so the fusion ability is better proportionally to dual progression. Overall, typically Imagination likes a lot of Infernoids in the graveyard, but if it helps accomplish that task through the summons of Tira, you need another Imagination to follow up. Overall, there's really nothing bad about Imagination, but it does demand a certain type of playstyle and can produce certain inefficiencies that I don't prefer. Sometimes I think it would have been better for Void Vanishment to have been a normal spell instead of a continuous spell, because as a continuous spell it may influence the quality of future Void spell or trap cards when they are so easily searchable by this card. Overall, my experience is that running lots of Void cards makes the deck inefficient because it is difficult to create the right balance between the number of Infernoid monsters and Void spell trap support due to the banishment involved in Infernoid summoning. Therefore, running Vanishment does not appear to be a good idea to maximizing win probability. The second effect is nice, but also hurts from a resource standpoint, as if the Infernoid is destroyed, it simply goes to the graveyard, where it can be summoned again if it's a higher level, or used to help summon another Infernoid if it's a lower level. Banishing takes away this resource. Void expansion is just too lackluster for my taste. Certainly there are times when it can be great, for after the activating turn it lets you summon one lower level Infernoid without cost by simply using the freely summoned token. However, the biggest problem with expansion is the fact that the lower levels cannot be special summoned from the graveyard, limiting its overall usefulness. Expansion is definitely nice to combo with Imagination, for it promotes swarming. The attack and card effect target magnet ability was better in the past when more decks ran cards that targeted. Overall, expansion is one of those cards that looks great when it works, but does not work often enough to warrant running it. Eye of the Void is a frustrating card because obviously the best targets are Onuncu and Devyaty, but the player does not receive their respective clearance effects when summoned. If I allowed summons from the graveyard in addition to summons from the hand, then maybe it would be worth something. Void Purification is a nice idea, but in practice it is too slow, too inefficient, and the lack of any innate protection makes it a general sitting duck for back row removal, limiting its usefulness. Void Launch has the same problem as Purification. Definitely a nice idea that fills a valid need for the deck. It just doesn't do it efficiently enough for my taste, although it is better than Purification in its execution. With the analysis of the direct support completed, what cards supplement the rest of the deck? Not surprisingly, one of the more popular strategies involving Infernoids involved their hybridization with a mini Lightsworn engine, typically utilizing 3 Rhino, 2 Charge of the Light Brigade, and usually either 1 Lila and or 1 Lumina to help dump as many Infernoids into the graveyard as possible. While this strategy is understandable, I have never been a fan of pure blind milling due to the potential to lose valuable cards that could expand playmaking. So I would prefer to go a different route away from the Lightsworn engine and combine some blind milling with some not so blind milling. First, I like running 2 copies of Fiendish Rhino Warrior. I'm not sure how popular this guy was in Infernoids when it was first released, but I don't see a lot of him anymore, and I really don't get why, for both of his effects serve the deck very well. First, when Rhino goes to the graveyard, whether it's from the deck, hand, or field, it gets to send 1 Fiend monster from the deck to the graveyard, so basically it's a great setup card. Rhino gets dumped in a mill, get a free Infernoid in the graveyard. Discard it for something like Twin Twister, get an Infernoid in the grave. Tribute it from the field for an Infernoid's effect. Not only is the opponent's graveyard play stymied, but get that extra Infernoid in the grave. The ability to select any Infernoid, similar to Foolish Burial, provides excellent versatility. The second effect of protecting Infernoids, general all fiends, but let's be honest, you're protecting Infernoids from battle or card effect destruction, is also rather helpful. While I can understand running 3 copies, in my experience I saw it a little too much early for my tastes at 3. Second, I run 2 copies of Kuribandit for more controlled milling or excavation. The ability of Infernoids to special summon themselves significantly unburdens the biggest negative that I feel for Kuribandit, having to tribute itself for its effect on the turn it was normal summoned during the end phase, which could leave you a clear field. Outside of the possibility on the first turn, Kuribandit really should never leave a clear field, for at least 1 Infernoid should be present to say goodbye. A 5-card excavation with the ability to add 1 spell or trap card if available from that excavation is excellent for this deck and goes a long way to setting up plays for next turn, especially if the grab spell is Monster Gate or Reasoning. Not surprisingly, I run the 2 allowable copies of Card Trooper. A 3 mil cost, so no effect negation can stop at least the mill, with a jump to 1900 attack, to help run over some opponents is certainly useful. Finally, a draw when it's destroyed is always nice. Its 400 attack during the opponent's turn will result in some life point lumps, but much more often than not, this guy helps over hurts, and if the damage is too much, most of the time it can be tributed for an Infernoid effect. Finally, rounding out the monsters, I run 1 copy of Glow Up Bulb for more Synchro play potential, 1 copy of Heroic Challenger Thousand Blades for defensive purposes and setting up possible rank 4 plays, well, only 1 rank 4 play after you see my extra deck, and 1 copy of Electromagnetic Turtle to buy another turn when needed. Turtle's another card that seems to fit very well with this deck, but you rarely ever see it. For For the non-direct support spells, I do not run either Raigeki or Soul Charge, but Soul Charge is debatable because while it is worthless relative to the Infernoid monsters not named Decatron, there are a number of interesting targets it can summon in this build. Not surprisingly, I run one copy of each of the Infernoid staples, one Burial from a different dimension, one Reasoning, and one Monster Gate. Burial is worth at least one free special summons and can return high-level Infernoids that were banished to the graveyard as well to make them more active. Reasoning and Monster Gate are the key millers for the deck. For draw power, I prefer one copy of One Day of Peace over one Upstart Goblin because it's me. 3 copies of Twin Twister work nicely because all high-level Infernoid monsters can be discarded at basically no cost due to their graveyard summoning, as well as Glow-Up Bulb and Rhino being good discard targets. Most of the time in Infernoid decks, Twin Twister is a quasi-+1. Also, due to the versatility of Decatron and the double Synchro capacity of Glow-Up Bulb when it's summoned to the field, I like running one copy of 1-for-1. Finally, closing out the spells, one Foolish Burial is very helpful for dumping a needed high-level Infernoid, deck thinning with Rhino, synchroing with Glow-Up Bulb, setting up your next play defense with Heroic, or battle phase skipping with Turtle. While I don't run it, for those interested, Miracle Dig is also an option as a slightly less effective version of Burial due to its Banish Zone requirement. I see Miracle Dig being much more effective in a deck that runs Void Imagination than one that doesn't. Note that I don't run Left Arm Offering because it is not reliable enough in my eyes. Clearly the chief purpose of Left Arm is to grab one of the one-copy spells, especially Reasoning. However, if you don't draw it in your opening turn, the requirement of at least 2 additional cards heavily limits its future usefulness. Also, the fact that the other cards are banished from the hand hurts the overall usefulness more than most realize due to probably maybe some observational bias, because similar to the Despot 002 machine duplication combination, I think most people remember those times when Left Arm nets them a first turn Reasoning, but forget all those times they top deck a Left Arm or draw it with only one card in hand and it's basically worthless. Also, I think too many people believe that Reasoning or Monster Gate is incorrectly situational critical for Infernoid, that they sacrifice too much consistency just to get that one card. Reasoning and to a lesser extent Monster Gate are definitely important, but Infernoid decks can win without them. Now, if Painful Choice was ever unbanned, please let that never happen, then I can see running Left Arm, because then you get a guaranteed large number of Infernoids in the graveyard from the deck. Reasoning and Gate, in the end, are too luck-based for the efficiency costs associated running Left Arm. Finally, for the remaining 3 cards, I like running 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force, because in my opinion, Drowning is the most important trap card in the game for a non-floater deck. For the extra deck, there are a variety of options due to the synchro capacity of Glow Up and Decatron, as well as the special summoning capacity of Infernoids to set up various different rank XZ plays. But design also needs to be careful due to the level rank restrictions associated with summoning Infernoids. Here's what I like. 1 Ultimaya Tzolkin, 1 Leo Keeper of the Sacred Tree, still a very strong monster against anything that isn't Monarchs. 1 Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, not easy to special summon, but can pay significant dividends when it was done so, largely due to the tuning summoning effect, as well as the negation effect. 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, 1 PSY-Framelord Omega. People love Omega, understandable in this deck, but I think the best thing about Omega is not actually the banish to the graveyard effect, but the ability to remove Omega from the field to free up the level restriction issues for Infernoid summoning. 1 Michael the Arch-Lightsworn, 1 HTS Psyhemuth, 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, 1 Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand, 1 Lancelot Ghost Knight of the Underworld, 1 Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, and 1 corresponding number 39 Utopia, and finally 1 Dante Traveler of the Burning Abyss for that milling. I'm not a fan of Bish Balkan in the general, even though summoning it in this deck is much more probable than most decks, because it's too slow and really just too easy to get off the field in the modern meta. If the tokens could not be tributed, then it would be worth running in my opinion, but that's not the case. Ultimaya is a real hit or miss extra deck strategy though for Infernoids because Decatron makes its summoning rather easy. However, there are some drawbacks as well, for there are only a small number of back row available to trigger Ultimaya versus Ultimaya-based decks. Its level 12 standing eliminates any summoning of any Infernoid monsters, meaning Ultimaya has to hold the field by itself, which the low amount of back row can make a little dicey. And finally, Ultimaya does demand some extra deck space, devotion, usually at least 4 spots. However, because Ultimaya is extra deck based and not main deck based, these inefficiencies are somewhat lessened. Note, though, I think Ultimaya in the end probably should be banned because Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon probably was the last straw that broke the Ultimaya camel's back in standpoint of how not broken it was. Overall, though, I think it's a little sad that a number of people simply viewed Infernoids as deceased from a competitive deck standpoint when reasoning fell from 3 to 1. Yes, it is unarguable that the loss of 2 reasoning hurt the deck, but there are more than enough cards to foster critical milling, aid Infernoid win probability. Infernoid's archetype banishing characteristic is still helpful in the meta. Take away that Cosmo Call a haunted target, remove that annoying Prime Monarch, or banish another meaningful graveyard card. Get some experience and a feel for Infernoids, and avoid those aggravating Imperial Iron Walls, and you'll find that this deck can still throw down, despite the loss of 2 reasonings. Well, that is my Infernoid deck. Thank you for your attention, and your time. I'm out.